In a town brimming with life and ambition, Angela Carter's presence commands attention not for what she wears or carries, but for what she represents. A trailblazer in her field, her every step forward is a testament to resilience, defying odds stacked against her. I'm here to deposit this check. The check, a symbol of months of hard work, carries not just a monetary value but the weight of validation. Yet, in this moment, Angela senses the familiar air of scrutiny veiled behind a practiced smile. That's quite an impressive amount, Ms. Carter. May I ask what kind of work you're involved in? I run a consulting firm specializing in organizational restructuring. This contract is the result of months of planning and execution. Ah, I see. Well, you'll understand if I need to verify the authenticity of this transaction. It's just standard procedure for sums of this size. Standard procedure. A phrase Angela has heard too often, wielded like a shield against accountability. She knows the doubt isn't in the check, it's in her. Take your time, Mr. Hayes. I'll wait here. You might find it more convenient to return later, perhaps with additional documentation. Or maybe another branch could assist you more quickly. I believe this branch is fully equipped to handle the matter. If further verification is required, I'll remain here until it's resolved. In her words, there's no anger, no raised voice. Just quiet defiance, a refusal to be dismissed, to let prejudice dictate the outcome. Very well, Ms. Carter. I'll see what I can do. The exchange hangs heavy, a battle waged not with fists but with words, not in the streets but within the walls of polished institutions. For Angela, this isn't just about a deposit, it's about dignity. How far we've come, and how far we still have to go. The weight of generations rests on her shoulders, but it's a burden she bears with pride. In standing tall, Angela isn't just fighting for herself, she's fighting for those who came before her and those who will come after. The bank lobby was a hive of activity, a mix of polished suits and hurried footsteps. Yet in the center of it all, Angela sat, her presence as commanding as it was isolating. Eyes darted toward her, some curious, some wary. The air around her buzzed not with anticipation, but with unease. Just breathe. You've faced worse than this. Angela's calm exterior masked the storm within. This wasn't the first time her integrity had been questioned, nor would it be the last. But today, she resolved, it would end differently. Ms. Carter, as I mentioned, we're verifying the check. These things take time. I understand, Mr. Hayes. But I'd like to remind you that my time is just as valuable as anyone else's. His smile tightened. It was the kind of smile that hid discomfort, not goodwill. We're doing everything by the book. Security will ensure the process remains orderly. Orderly. A word that stung like an accusation. Angela glanced at the uniformed officer now stationed conspicuously nearby, his gaze fixed on her like she was an anomaly rather than a customer. Orderly, Mr. Hayes? Am I giving you any reason to suggest otherwise? It's just protocol, Ms. Carter. Nothing personal. That's the problem, Mr. Hayes. It's never personal, is it? The whispers began. She could feel them, like a tide rising around her. A young couple exchanged glances. An older man shook his head. Sympathy and suspicion collided in the air, an invisible war fought in silence. Stay calm. Don't let them see the cracks. Remember who you are. But it wasn't just about who Angela was, it was about where she'd come from. The echoes of her past swirled in her mind, unbidden but grounding. Grandma, why do they treat us like we're less? Baby, you're not less. You're more. But being more scares people who think they're better. Stand tall. Always. And she had. From acing exams in classrooms where she wasn't welcome to building a business in a world that doubted her. Every triumph had been a brick in the foundation of her resilience. You know, Ms. Carter, sometimes these large transactions attract scrutiny. Surely you understand. I understand that scrutiny should be applied equally. Tell me, Mr. Hayes, would you have questioned this check if someone else had brought it in? Hayes faltered, his confidence momentarily shaken. But privilege rarely admitted doubt. This isn't about you. It's about process. And if the process is flawed, what then? Who's held accountable for that? The standoff grew, an unspoken battle of wills. Angela wasn't just fighting for herself, she was challenging the very foundations of the room she sat in. Excuse me for a moment, Mr. Hayes. Dialing with precision, she reached her assistant, her voice a mix of calm and command. Elena, connect me to corporate. I need someone to remind this branch about our partnership. Hayes' smug confidence wavered as he watched her, the authority he claimed slipping like sand through his fingers. Angela's resolve was unshakable, her voice a clarion call against injustice. Now, Mr. Hayes, let's see if we can resolve this properly. Or would you prefer to wait until corporate gets involved? The room felt different now. The whispers had stopped, replaced by a charged silence. Angela wasn't just a woman waiting for a check to clear, she was a force, one that demanded respect, not as a favor but as a right. This isn't just about me. It's about everyone who's been told to sit down when they deserve to stand. The battle wasn't over, but Angela had already won the most important fight, the one within herself. She wouldn't be dismissed. Not today. Not ever. The air in the bank had been thick with tension, but now, it was as if time itself held its breath. Angela's steady presence, once isolated and quiet, now felt like a force that could shatter the room. There had been whispers before, unspoken judgments, sideways glances, but now, those same eyes turned to her with curiosity, uncertainty, and something else, fear. Mr. Hayes, you've made a mistake. You should have known better. Hayes faltered, his face a mask of confusion and thinly veiled pride. But Angela, unmoved, held his gaze, unshaken by the tension that cracked in the space between them. She had spent years building a reputation, fighting for every inch of progress, every shred of respect that people like Hayes never even had to consider earning. I'm just following the procedure, Ms. Carter. It's not personal. I assure you. Let's be clear, Mr. Hayes. This is personal. This is about how you've decided, in your own mind, who deserves dignity and who doesn't. The words hung in the air, each one slicing through the room like a thunderclap. Hayes' face reddened. He opened his mouth, but no words came. Just then, the sound of tires on gravel reached their ears, the unmistakable hum of a black car pulling into the parking lot. They're here. The doors to the lobby opened, and a tall, poised figure stepped in, dressed sharply in a dark suit. Behind him, two assistants followed, carrying briefcases. The man's gaze swept the room before landing on Angela. Without a word, he walked toward her. Mr. Hayes, allow me to introduce my legal representative. The room went still. Angela's calm demeanor did not betray the weight of the moment, but those who were watching could feel the shift. Hayes looked like he'd just swallowed something bitter, the realization of his mistake dawning on him. He had no idea who he was dealing with. Mr. Hayes, I'm here to ensure that this matter is resolved according to the law. I'd appreciate it if you would step aside. Hayes stood frozen, a man unaccustomed to being addressed with such authority, let alone by someone who was clearly not part of his world. But Angela wasn't done. She wasn't just going to expose Hayes' prejudices, she was going to show him just how deeply his assumptions had cost him. I am not just a customer here. I own part of this bank. A significant part. The words were like an explosion, echoing through the space. People blinked, their confusion palpable. Hayes' mouth opened, but no sound came out. He hadn't just misjudged Angela, he had completely underestimated her. She wasn't just any woman, She was a woman with power, a woman who had worked tirelessly to dismantle the barriers placed in front of her. You see, Mr. Hayes, my name isn't just on a customer list. It's on the board of directors. I'm an investor. A stakeholder in this institution. And you're about to learn what accountability looks like. Hayes' eyes flickered with disbelief, but it was more than that. There was a creeping realization that the pedestal he stood on was crumbling beneath him. His miscalculations had cost him, and now, there was no turning back. Mr. Hayes, I'm afraid I'm going to have to ask you to leave the premises. Effective immediately. The words were clear, decisive, and without hesitation. Hayes' posture shrank, his shoulders slumping as his eyes darted nervously between Angela and the legal team. His pride, his authority, was slipping away faster than he could hold on. This isn't how it's supposed to be. I was just doing my job. Your job is to serve customers, Mr. Hayes, not to judge them. If you can't do that with dignity, then you have no place here. Hayes turned to the legal representative, but the man had already moved toward the door, signaling for Hayes to leave. The room remained silent, watching as Hayes, who had wielded his small corner of power with reckless abandon, was escorted out. This moment isn't just about me. It's about all of us. The ones who have been overlooked, the ones who have been belittled, the ones whose worth was determined not by their actions but by the color of their skin. This is about showing that we will not be treated like second-class citizens in a system that was never meant for us. Angela's voice rang out, her words solidifying her place not just in the room but in the hearts of those who had watched. She wasn't seeking revenge, she was seeking justice. She wasn't standing here for herself alone, she was standing for every person who had ever been denied their right to be seen, to be heard. We are more than our circumstances. We are more than the limitations that have been placed upon us. And it's time for all of us to rise. To rise above the hatred. To rise above the bias. To rise for those who come after us. The room erupted in applause, some tentative, some with fierce pride, but all of it was real. The weight of what had just transpired settled over them, and the power of Angela's words took root in the hearts of everyone who had witnessed the shift. This is not the end. This is just the beginning. Let's make sure that the next time a door is closed to someone, they find a way to open it. Let's break these chains together. And with that, Angela stepped out of the shadows, not just as a customer, but as a leader, as a force. In that moment, she wasn't just fighting for herself, she was fighting for a future where everyone, regardless of their skin, could stand tall, walk proud, and be treated with the dignity they deserved. The shock waves from that moment rippled through the room, through the bank, and beyond. And though there would be challenges ahead, Angela knew one thing for certain: she had just opened the door to a new world, one where accountability and change were no longer just a dream, but a reality. Angela stood tall as she walked out of the bank, the weight of the day's events still heavy in the air around her. She wasn't just leaving the place that had tried to hold her down, but she was leaving it as a victor. The shame that had clung to her during her earlier encounters had now been replaced with an unshakable sense of pride and purpose. She wasn't simply walking away from the battle she had fought, she was stepping into a future of change, one that was brighter for everyone who had ever felt the sting of prejudice. As she approached her car, the sound of footsteps hurriedly catching up to her made her stop. Turning around, Angela saw Mr. Hayes, the CEO of the bank, walking toward her. His demeanor was different now, no longer filled with arrogance, but instead, an uncomfortable humility that seemed to drain every bit of confidence he once had. He stopped just a few steps away from her, his face flushed with what could only be described as a mix of regret and fear. "Angela," he began, his voice unsteady. I wanted to say I'm sorry. I didn't realize the kind of damage I was causing. The way I treated you, the way I allowed things to happen." He trailed off, unable to find the right words, his hands nervously wringing together. Angela stared at him for a moment, the emotions within her swirling. She had spent so many years fighting the systems that sought to silence people like her, people who were too often unseen, unheard. But now, in the face of Hayes' apology, she felt a strange sense of release. "You don't need to apologize to me," she said quietly, her voice steady but filled with the weight of everything she had endured. "You need to apologize to everyone who has ever been treated like I was, and do something about it. Words mean nothing without action." Hayes nodded, his face reflecting a mixture of shame and realization. "I know. I plan to start with that. I've already scheduled diversity training for the staff. I want to make things right." Angela's gaze softened just slightly. She wasn't sure if he truly understood yet, or if his actions would match his words. But for the first time in their interactions, she saw the potential for change in him. Perhaps it wasn't too late for him to learn. "You'll have to do more than that," she added, her voice firm. "But I'll believe you if I see it." As she turned to leave, she felt a momentary sense of peace. Her thoughts drifted back to the years of struggle, to the countless moments when she had questioned her worth, when she had wondered if her voice would ever be heard. She had never imagined that this was how her story would unfold, that her courage and resilience would break through barriers she hadn't even known were there. Later that night, in the quiet of her apartment, Angela reflected on the day's events. The news had spread quickly, and the story of her confrontation with Hayes had become a local sensation. Journalists from across the city had called for interviews, and one particular article had caught her eye. It was a piece from a local reporter who had framed the entire incident not just as a story of one woman's fight against prejudice, but as a larger commentary on the need for systemic change. As Angela read the article, she couldn't help but smile at the way the writer had captured the essence of her journey, how the moment wasn't just a personal triumph, but a stepping stone toward a more inclusive future. The article didn't just tell her story, it gave a voice to every person who had been marginalized, every person who had fought quietly for their place in the world. It was a powerful reminder that her struggle had never been just her own. The next morning, Angela stood before a group of local business leaders, addressing a crowd that had gathered for a diversity initiative she had launched. The event had been her idea, her way of ensuring that the lessons learned from her experience weren't forgotten, that the changes she had sparked would continue long after the headlines had faded. "Good morning, everyone," she began, her voice resonating with the same calm power that had made her stand out in the face of adversity. "I'm here today because I believe we have the power to create change, not just for ourselves, but for the generations to come. My story isn't unique. It's one shared by countless others who have been held back by bias, by discrimination, and by the prejudices of others." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle over the crowd. "But today, I'm here to tell you that we don't have to live in the shadows anymore. We don't have to accept the status quo. We have the ability to challenge it, to rewrite the narrative, and to create spaces where everyone regardless of their background can thrive." The room was quiet, save for the sound of a few people shifting in their seats. Angela could see the effect her words were having on them, the realization dawning in their eyes. They weren't just listening to her, they were hearing her. "I've had my fair share of battles," she continued. "But this isn't just my victory. It's ours. Each one of us has a role to play in making sure that what happened to me doesn't happen again. We have to push for diversity, for inclusion, for equity in every space we occupy. It's time for us to rise together, to hold ourselves and each other accountable, and to lead by example." She looked around the room, meeting the eyes of every person present. "This is just the beginning. I'm calling on all of you to join me, to take the lessons we've learned and make them a part of our everyday actions. Together, we can make this city, this country, a place where no one has to fight alone." As the event came to a close, Angela felt a sense of fulfillment that she had never known before. Her fight wasn't over, but she had taken the first steps toward creating a world where her daughter wouldn't have to face the same battles she had. The journey ahead was long, but Angela knew she was no longer alone. She had sparked something that couldn't be extinguished, something that would live on in every conversation, every action, and every life that had been touched by her words. The applause echoed in the room, but it was the quiet determination in her heart that truly fueled her resolve. This wasn't the end. It was just the beginning.